Welcome everyone joining us in person and via live stream, and thank you for being here. All our board members are present, with the exception of Jim Facer, who's excused. Oh, he'll be joining us by phone, okay. The purpose of the work session is to receive operational reports from the administration. We'll begin with the Head Start program information report, which will be provided by Kathy Losmack.
Thank you, members of the board, Dr. Howell. Before you is our annual program information report, otherwise known as PIR, and I know you've received a copy of this past year. It looks at a variety of information of the services that we are providing during this past year, as well as the makeup of the families and children that we are serving. What I went is I kind of looked at the year before just to know, was there anything in particular that really stood out? So one of the things that has changed for this last year was the first year where families who are receiving SNAP, which is formerly known as SNAP, food stamps, that became a categorically eligible so that families no longer needed to provide their income. We accepted the income that had already been verified through the SNAP program. And so that was the first year, and altogether we had roughly about 41% of our families qualify for that reason alone. The other thing that was new to this report is they're now looking at chronic absenteeism, which in the Head Start world is a child, even if excused, missing 2 or more days per month. And I wish I could say the numbers were better, but our percentage of kids who did end up being chronically absent for last year was almost 62%. So we know that many of the children, because of not having been out and about, perhaps not being up to date on their immunizations, their immune systems are not as robust as they have been in previous years. And so we've had a variety of illnesses go through our preschool program, as have daycare centers in town. So we're hoping now that these children are coming in a little bit stronger, and we'll start to work on getting those numbers down. Information otherwise was pretty consistent from one year to the next. The thing that we saw change the most was in the health section and looking at chronic health conditions of children. This is anywhere from severe allergies to asthma to diabetes. The total number of children that we had enrolled last year that met that criteria was 38, or almost 25% of the students that we enrolled last year. That was a huge increase. The year before, 5.36%. And I can tell you that already this year it's starting off really high. So that is an interesting thing that we're noting, and we're having to write a lot more health plans for these children in order for them to attend school safely. So we'll be monitoring that very closely. The other thing that we noted was we do heights and weights on children twice a year, and by the end of the year we were seeing the numbers for children who are considered overweight or obese, that had also increased. The year before was 22.62%, and last year was 33.77%. So something that tells us about a population of children that hadn't been very mobile during these years. So we're going to make sure that we do a lot of movement with our kids, even beyond what we normally do. Otherwise, like I said, numbers were pretty stable. The previous year, we had a huge increase of children on IEPs, which was at 26%. We're back down to 14%, which, we have to have at least 10%. 14 to 18 is pretty common for us to see, so we were seeing more reasonable numbers there. Things that families were experiencing, of course, the increase we saw was crisis intervention this past year, whether it be food scarcity, lack of adequate housing. So we were really working hard with our families, and what we have noted already for this year is number of families coming in under being homeless. So both those numbers, homeless has risen the past year and continues to rise, so we're trying to look at what we can do to help families with that, as well as seeing more families coming in under the foster care system too.
Okay.
So if there's any particular questions I can entertain for you.
Thanks, Kathy.
All right, thank you.
Next on the agenda is the proposed 2023-2024 Continuous Improvement Plan presented by Amy Bowie.
Good afternoon. In your packet, you have access to the draft of the Continuous Improvement Plan for 23-24. And the first 7 pages, and I'm going to read all of them to you. The first 7 pages, that's the narrative. That's the first part of what is required by us to submit to the state. And there's 3 parts that are required: the mission, the vision, and community involvement. And you can see under community involvement the various ways in which we receive input from community members and patrons and parents as we build this continuous improvement plan. You can see that we post it for review and comment. We have parent advisory committees, a district curriculum committee, and that we meet for the first time on September 21st, and we'll present this plan to them to get input there. Key communicators, and finally, adoption committees. And adoption committees are an interesting group because they provide feedback on curriculum needs in relation to the district's continuous improvement plan, and we consider that as we build the plan as well. So it was just important for us to reflect the various contact points we had in which parents had opportunities to have input. Then I think it's important for you to know that the other 2 parts of the narrative, the literacy intervention plan and the college and career advising, those are now optional for us to, not for us to do them, but for us to include them in the narrative of our plan. We're still required to update them, but it just seemed important as a team. We decided for transparency and as a reminder to continuously update these plans, we included both of those in the narrative that we'll be submitting. The due date for this is October 1st. I don't know if you remember that, but the due date is October 1st for this plan. So all of that, and there were some updates that AJ and his team made with the literacy intervention plan. There were some updates that Sue made with the college and career advising. The big change in the college and career advising section is that with the new legislation of the career pathway plans, that all 7th and 8th grade students now need to take, 7th or 8th grade students need to take a career course in middle school and begin their career pathway plans, and so that's included. That's probably a big change you should be aware of. And then the next part of the plan after the narrative is the metrics, and they just give us a template and they ask for this data. So anything in red will not be on there when I submit it. It's just to provide context for you as you're looking at it, so they don't seem like arbitrary numbers. If you look at the 4-year cohort graduation rate, we set our target at 91%. That was our goal. We set it at 91. In red, you can see we were 89.6%, and so we decided to set our goal again at 91% for next year. Just to provide some further context, I did some digging, and if you look at the 5 largest traditional school districts in Idaho, and what their graduation rates are, Pocatello was at the top with 89.6, Bonneville with 88.3, West Ada with 84.5, Boise with 83.3, and Nampa with 75.5. So we were, of the 5 largest traditional school districts, we were leading the way. And so now the Accountability Oversight Committee, one of their 4 major focus areas is our statewide stagnant graduation rates, right? The goal, what they want every district to be is 95%, 94.9 to be exact. And so one of the things they're really working on, or one of their 4 focus areas is stagnant graduation rates. But I feel like we're doing a pretty good job in that area, and we'll continue to work on that. And then you can see the 5-year cohort graduation rate, and that's just, some students, it takes them just a little longer to graduate, just a few extra months or a credit or 2, and so that number usually goes up. So you can look at that.
And you're on page 8, right?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah, that's where I am.
Can I ask you a question about this?
You bet.
So 4-year and then 5-year, it says the 89 and the 91, and then, then it says the percentage of students who meet college-ready benchmark on college entrance exam
Yeah.
is 34%.
Yeah, so this, let me talk, I'm about to address, no, you're fine, I'm about to address that one. So this one's a little tricky, and it's an optional metric now, and this is why students are no longer required to take college entrance exams. So what we're looking, it's hard to compare apples to apples when some districts have this many students who take it, and some districts have all their students taking it. So it's an optional test. Students aren't required to take it. So what that means, if they met the college ready benchmark, that means they met a benchmark on both the ELA and math portion. So 34 of our we set our goal that 34% of our students would meet both. 34% of them did, and at the state level, 33% of them. So anytime you see a dash, here's my code, ready? Anytime you see a dash, it's comparing us to the state. So statewide, 33% of the students who tested, because now it's not required, met that benchmark, and in our district, it was 34%. So then if you move on to ISATs, the percent of students who score proficient on the grade 8 math ISAT, you can follow that. You can see that we set our goal last year at 44%, okay? What we got, our results, 42% of our students were proficient, as opposed to the rest of the state, 34% of them were proficient. I went a step further and provided you a little longitudinal data from the year previous to that. So the year previous to that, we were 40% proficient, and the state was 36. So you can see we went from 21, 22, we went from 40 to 42, and we had set our goal at 44, and we're going to continue to set our goal at 44. That black number is, the state doesn't ask us to report what we actually got. They just ask us to set another target, right? So that's what's in black. I know, would make no sense to talk to you about that, would it? Just arbitrary numbers. That's why I'm giving you these red numbers. So you can see, like, for example, I just want you to understand this. So the state went from 36% proficient to 34% proficient. We went from 40 to 42. Does that make sense? Okay, and once you get that system, now I want you to skip the adequate growth, because that's a whole different thing to look at, benchmark, and go down to 8th grade ELA. So 8th grade ELA, in 21, we were 62. In 22, we were 56, and we set our goal at 64. So we went down. But you can see that the state went down from 54 to 49. So we were still significantly above the state there. And then if you go down to 6th grade math, ISAT, you can see we set our goal at 44, and we hit 42. The year before that, we were 41. The state actually dropped from 41 to 37, and we went up from 41 to 42. And then the 6th grade ELA ISAT, we set our goal at 57, and then we hit 54, but we had dropped from 55% to 54%. The state dropped from 53 to 47. Okay, so does that help a little bit, give you some context of why we set the goals the way we did? Okay, now the lines I told you to skip, it's just because I don't want to talk about those. No, I'm just kidding. I'll tell you why. Those are much more complex, and let me tell you why. So,
Mrs. Bowie, before you go any further, can you just frame it even more detailed with the context of the test itself?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, the ISAT test.
Because I think as we get into the next section, but
It-
we get too far, we'll forget.
So you want me to make it relevant now? Yeah, this is coming up later, but I'll tell you now. So the blueprint of the test, it went from a shortened test in 21 to because of COVID, like they shortened the test, right? It went back to the full blueprint, so the longer test. So it becomes difficult when you're looking at longitudinal data when the test blueprint is changing, and that may account for, because you can see, I mean, when we look and we see numbers decrease, that's always cause for alarm. We want to dig deeper. But then when we see it's mirroring what the state's doing as well, we can't help but wonder if some of that is, or all of that, is contributed to changes in the test blueprint. Does that make sense? And that will come up later. Okay, and then if you look at the adequate growth, it asks us to measure the percent of students who make adequate growth on whatever test, right? And adequate growth is there's a 3-year trajectory of how, for each individual student, a 3-year trajectory of what they need to get each year to stay on target to be proficient. Okay, and so each year it can measure, did they meet that? Did they meet their projected growth that they needed that year? So we set our goal at 48%. I bet you're wondering what we got. So am I. We won't know until October 30th or November, which seems a little crazy. The end of October, beginning of November. It seems crazy because this report is due on October 1st, right? There's just some nuances in calculating that data that it takes them longer. And but just so you know, even though we'll submit this plan, we'll have those conversations about that data when it's relevant and available. What I did provide for you, though, so that you knew we weren't just making up arbitrary numbers, is what the growth percentages were for the past 2 years. So we set our goal at 48. We don't know what we got. But the year before that, those 8th grade math students, 50% of them met their growth goals. And the year before that, 42% of them met their growth goals. So that was on, and to me, as a teacher, if you get down to the classroom level, that growth is more important to me as a teacher than even the proficiency rate, because the proficiency rate doesn't tell us, like, well, what are so the ISAT is a 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? A 3 is proficient. What the proficiency doesn't tell us is, well, what happened to the 3s and the 4s? Are they still growing? What happened to the 1? Did they get to a 2? They might not have gotten all the way to the 3. So looking at the growth becomes really important. It's just unfortunate that we can't do it before this report is submitted. But I want you to know that we'll continue to look at that. So you can glance at those numbers and the goals that we set for those. Okay, then the next section, section 2, this is our IRI. So this one's, I'll start with this as well. In fact, I'll just read it right from the, so here's what happened to the IRI test. So prior to the fall of 2022, the kindergarten IRI was renormed. And the K-5 assessment, look, all of them, the K-5 assessments were realigned with new scale scores. So there seems to be some you'll see this, there seems to be just some discrepancy in these scores as well. So I'll show you this. So the percent of students who score proficient on kindergarten IRI, we set that at 75%. Okay, and that's the spring IRI. So we wanted 75% of our students to be proficient on the spring. Here's what we got. They were 64% proficient in the fall, and they grew by spring to 72%. So they almost hit that target that we set. Okay? The state, there's that dash, so the state grew from 52 to 65. The year before, and this is where we were again a little alarmed with the data. The year before, we went from 43% to 73%, which that's a ton of growth, right? But you can see that they started lower, both for the state. They were 43% proficient in the fall and 41% 41% proficient in the fall, which is much lower than the 64 and 52, right? So you can see that, and then we kept it at 75. So you can glance through those. Grade 1, we set it at 70%, and they went from 62 to 63. But again, it kind of mirrored what the state was doing all, like you can see it sort of mirrored. So I think the final answer on the IRI data is we kind of thought that this would be our new baseline, right? With now that they've kind of renormed and rescaled those tests. So it's kind of hard to look longitudinally, which is super frustrating for people like us who like to look at data and growth. But I think this kind of provides a new baseline for us. Then if you go down to,
So can I ask a question?
yeah, you bet.
So I guess what I'm also thinking about
Mhm.
is the fact that the kids who were in second grade the last year are the ones that are in third grade.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm not on the mic.
Mhm.
So do you also take that, because, I'm also looking there, you've got that fourth grade ELA, 60% versus, what were they the year before?
So this is important to notice. They throw in the grade 4 ELA ISAT, okay, and then the rest of those tests are IRIs.
IRIs, oh. Okay.
Yeah, do you
Yep,
see that?
yep, I see that.
So so you don't want to compare the IRI data to the ISAT data because
Yep,
they're
I
two
missed
different
that. I missed that.
beasts. That's low.
But I guess when you're setting these goals, though, is that what you're also looking at, is who the kids were that are, as they move?
We absolutely
Okay.
look at that. Yep, okay,
No, I have a question about
Okay.
the IRI and ISAT.
okay.
I have heard that with the new reading curriculum that we adopted, but also the new reading standards at the state level,
Uh-huh.
it's difficult, the test isn't really matching up with.
That's a good question. They're working on, and we don't know, we don't know the answer yet. Good question, we don't know. The state is bringing in some people to look at the alignment, and we'll find out, and they'll decide if it's aligned enough with the new standards already, or if they want to revise the test after that, and we do not know the answer to that yet. That's a great question. Okay, and then the performance metric. We chose, this one's interesting. Percent of third grade students who scored below proficient on the fall IRI who gained at least one performance category on the spring IRI. In retrospect, I kind of wish this wasn't the one we selected. The state recommended it, but in retrospect with the change of the test, right? I don't know how meaningful it is, but we have a baseline. Like I said, we have a baseline. We're moving forward. We set our goal at 54% because what we knew was that 52% the year that we looked at this in 22-23 from the year before, 52% of those students who scored below proficient grew at least one category, 52%. So we set it at 54. That made sense, right? Like, let's keep increasing. Well, new tests, new norms, new scale scores, only 29% of those, when we were like, please tell me this is wrong. Like I can't tell you how many hours we spent trying to figure out why that number was so low. Like a lot of hours, after work hours, going, no, wait a minute, maybe we're looking at it wrong. I think we're not looking at it wrong. But what it did cause us to do is to do a deep data dive and look at, okay, they're not growing a whole scale score, right? But are they growing? And we started to measure in increments of like 20-point growth and 30, and we're seeing that kids were growing. And again, we just have to attribute some of that to the change in the test.
I also have another question about that. The kids
Mhm.
that score a 3,
Mhm.
they have nowhere to go in the spring. Are those taken out of this progress, because they don't have anywhere to go? And so they would actually bring the percentage down if they remain at a 3.
Yeah, yes, because this one is just looking at those who were
Go up.
below proficient.
But
Yeah,
really, if you want an accurate score, you've got to take out the ones
and we did.
already.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah,
you
because we
did.
were only, if you look at the wording of it, students who scored below proficient on the fall IRI.
Oh,
That's who we looked at, and out of those kids, did they grow at least one?
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
That's a good question, too. Okay, then the career and college advising, college and career advising, that didn't come out right. Percentage of 11th and 12th grade students accessing Fast Forward Advanced Opportunities funding. We set a goal for 70% in 22-23, and this one actually asks for results, right? 65% was what we hit, and we kept that goal at 70%. We want our students to keep accessing that money. Okay, So finally, this part, after you dig in and look at the data, it asks you to give a report of progress. And so you can see our team looked at some successes, some challenges, and some plans moving forward. I can highlight a couple of those. We continue. I think I've mentioned most of them as we've gone through. Like, we continue to perform above the state on ISAT in all grade levels in English, math, and science. We're proud of that. The district is above the state on the SAT for percentage of test takers who met both benchmarks. The district is above the state on the SAT for percentage of test takers who met the English and reading and writing benchmark, and we were equivalent with the state on those who met just the math benchmark. So challenges, I think I touched on most of the challenges. If you look at the second, I talked about IRI. The second bullet is that fact that SAT is optional. The third bullet, the district does follow the state trend of a proficiency gap becoming transparent in fifth grade math as measured by ISAT. So as you look at the trending data, third and fourth graders are pretty close to proficient. If they're not proficient, they're close to proficient in third and fourth grade in math. And then a gap occurs starting in fifth through seventh grade. So a lot of our professional development and our money that we spend will be geared at middle school math interventions and trying to close that gap. Then in 11th grade, the students are required to take the ISAT, ELA, math, and science, along with other optional assessments such as the SAT, AP test during spring, and all that is a 6-week period. So we worry, one of our challenges is we worry about test overload on those 11th grade students. It's a lot. I had an 11th grader living in my home last year, and that's a lot of testing in a 6-week period, right? And they start to kind of question, like, well, what does the ISAT do for me? Like, I know what my AP test is going to do for me. I know what my SAT is going to do for me, but the ISAT, does that matter as much? And I'm exhausted from all these other tests. So do I, like, we're dealing with some of those testing challenges that we're working on with the state. A slight decrease in ADA may have contributed to lower student achievement on standardized assessments. And then our plans moving forward. Our K-5 ELA curriculum includes a K-2 structured literacy scope and sequence. So just like the state, we're going to continue to focus on those foundational skills in K-2. District data teams will continue to measure, I told you about the IRI. The implementation of professional development with the core math, I talked about that. PLC groups will look, oh, this is big, and I haven't talked about this yet. PLC groups will focus on utilizing the ISAT target reports to identify areas of strength and weakness in reading, writing, and math to inform their instruction. These are relatively new reports. This is really only the second year that our teachers at the classroom level have gotten information back from the ISAT test that says, here's where my students were strong, here's where my students were weak, so they can then make their goals for their evaluation based on areas of weakness, and they can start talking as a PLC group. And Kathy Luris worked really hard to make sure that they understood that target analysis report and that it got down to the PLC level. So
PLC.
Professional learning community.
Okay.
So like all of the first grade teachers meet together on a Monday,
Okay.
right? All of the 6th grade math teachers meet together on a Monday. And so in their groups of math teachers, they can look at their individual teacher level data and all the 6th grade teacher level data. And they can identify those strengths and weaknesses and start to, and because to me, a test is just a test unless it informs instruction. And the AP test has done that for years. When I taught AP, I got a report back and said, your student, you want to know what mine was? 1900 and before. I was like, okay, we've got to read more stuff from the 19th century. We've got to do more 19th century lit because that's where my scores were low with my students. But the ISAT didn't do that for years until recently. And now, it's more meaningful and actionable. Actionable is the word. They can take the data and they can make it actionable and inform their classrooms, and that's important.
Can I ask you a question about that too?
Sure.
And it seems like this is getting into details, but it's really not.
That's okay.
ISAT, so you're talking about the ISAT to identify the areas of strengths and weaknesses. Are teachers being, they are not making groups based on ISAT scores, correct? It's based on diagnostic testing.
There's, ISAT is one data point as they make their
It's a-
decision.
Yeah, universal screening.
Mm-hmm, yep, it's one
And
data
so
point.
is it based on diagnostic?
Other diagnostics,
Because
it's
a
one
lot-
data point.
A lot of times people, I mean, some districts do that.
Mm-hmm.
They group kids based on ISAT scores, and I'm just curious if our district.
We emphasize in the universal spreadsheet and every time we talk to teachers that the ISAT was one test on one day. It's one data point. You look at how they're performing, you look at how they're growing, you look at other diagnostics that are available. Yeah,
Before their group.
yeah, absolutely. Yep. Okay. And the last part of this,
Can I ask you one
You
other
bet.
question?
Mhm.
On the scope and sequence, on the structured literacy, is the intervention also paired with that, in using the same structured literacy as the curriculum that we adopted?
I was definitely 100% prepared for your question on structured literacy. Because it's, here's why, not I didn't think it was gonna be
It's
your
huge
question.
difference.
I just know that it's really
Really big.
important, and we just made the decision to go with the structured literacy program that more closely aligns with the science of reading, and HMH gave us a choice on that.
Idaho standard.
Here's what I know that the interventionists work closely with the teachers, so have I talked to Raina and her interventionists to answer that with 100% confidence? No. Am I 95% confident that Raina Patterson, who's our federal programs director, and her interventionists will absolutely, in fact, AJ could probably, they absolutely work daily with those teachers, and it would make no sense for them to do it any other way than follow what the classroom teachers are doing. Am I right when I say that, AJ?
So that's kind of.
Look, AJ, here comes AJ with his literacy.
I mean, this whole thing is a change. The new curriculum is a change.
Right, yeah.
So,
Yes, and we still have, it lists the interventions that are in there as well with our literacy plan. So we still use, there will be structured literacy along with guided reading and those interventions that we are still using based on needs and what they're working on. But it is new and we are in the middle of
you're just
integrating that right now. It's just really focusing on the curriculum piece of that. We're just starting our diagnostics and assessments, but we will continue to look at interventions and what's needed at those, especially at those younger grade levels with the structured literacy piece.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, AJ. And then the last part is my favorite part of the continuous improvement plan. It is not my favorite part of the continuous, but I don't have to do it. AJ and Sue do it. So it's the staff performance, and so this is compliance to legislation. That's what this is. So here's why this gets tricky. You'll see that we have. It makes sense to do it in some areas like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, because we have a common assessment tool. We have the IRI. So it makes sense to go ahead and look that in first grade, right, the ISAT, the ISIP or the IRI was used, and that 75%, our goal was that we wanted 75% of our teachers to meet their student achievement goal. The teacher student achievement goal. We wanted 75% of them to meet that. 84% of those teachers met that student achievement goal that they set with their students, okay? And then our new goal for the next year is 80%. So you'll notice that there was pages and pages of this for secondary, and this is why I disliked it with all of my heart, because, and they finally addressed it at the state level on the webinar. They said that oftentimes, which is true in our district, each individual teacher, they're not using the same assessment tool. There's not an IRI, right, for 10th grade physics. Okay, there's not an IRI for that, right? So each teacher uses their own. They can use a pre and post test. They can use a course final. They can use any measure they want on their evaluation. And so for a while they were making us, Sue, namely, group teachers together and say, well, they were giving a pre and post test, so we'll group them together and report meaningless data. So we no longer have to report the meaningless data, which makes me really happy. You can see that in section 6, I made a little note, which is what they told me to do, that says Staff performance data is provided for the instructional pupil personnel staff groups for which there are 5 or more staff using the same assessment tool. However, we're unable to provide staff performance report data for the following groups because there are no groups of 5 or more using the same assessment tool. Rather, these groups use individual assessments to measure student achievement for their evaluations, which is what we've done for years. We were just, and they finally said, don't make up the data to fit which is kind of what everyone was doing. So there was celebration there. And so then we just included the ones we didn't include, and we're all happy. Okay, that's all I have.
One other question.
Thank you.
Okay.
At the state level, since you kind of are more aware of what's going on at the state level, are they considering progress monitoring instead of all of this?
I do not know.
But that's what we would want though, right? Because I know that our new superintendent, Debbie Critchfield, wants that. Anyway, just curious if you have seen.
Let me tell you, I will tell you this, as I get any information regarding that specific thing, I will let you know. But as of now, in fact, I was supposed to meet with
A
someone.
lot of these, the
Yeah.
things that you're talking about.
Right.
A lot of, it would be more
Oh.
accurate.
Yeah, and that's what the teachers do in the classroom, right?
Right.
That's what they watch. Okay, thank you, guys.
Thank
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Amy. Next on the agenda is the draft letter of intent regarding exchange of property, which will be presented by John Balls.
Good afternoon, board members. In front of you, we're introducing a letter that we had, again, an introduction this week and up for action or approval next week. And this is a letter of intent to exchange real property. And the letter goes on to state that we would like to enter into further negotiations with the property owner across from Highland High School and do an exchange of land for a portion of our property owned by this school district down the street 2 blocks there on Olympus and Jerome. And so this letter is just kind of a precursor to the legal document, which is a property and exchange agreement. But this kind of sets more action going forward so that we could accomplish this this transaction that we feel that would be very beneficial for the future of Highland High School, having that property across the street.
Okay. Any questions?
Any questions, anything? Again, we'll visit more as if there's any questions that come up, we'll visit next week about this as well.
Thanks, John.
Okay.
Next on the agenda is the bond election overview training, which will be provided by Representatives Holly Troxel and Piper Sandler.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna introduce these gentlemen. This is part of our bond team. This is Brandon Helgeson from Holly Troxel and Eric Herringer from Piper Sandler. So they have some presentations for you, some information. You can ask them questions. The documents that these gentlemen have produced is the last item there, the bond election resolutions in the addendum. So you can maybe reference those. We'll talk more on that agenda item as well, but this will kind of help kind of the presentation, kind of set the groundwork for some of those documents that we'll discuss.
Great. Thank you. Hello, everybody, trustees of the board. My name is Brandon Helgeson. I'm an associate at Holly Troxel. And you should have in front of you a presentation titled Bond Election Considerations that I wanted to take a chance to run through. I'm joined here by Eric Herringer, and I think we can talk a little bit at the end of the presentation a bit more about the resolutions themselves, since there's several for consideration that we've prepared. However, I just wanted to briefly go over the bond election process, brief overview of what we do as bond counsel to the district, and then a little bit of training / Q&A on election advocacy, certain prohibitions that are applicable to public entities in that space. So feel free to interrupt at any time during this presentation, but, and can you all hear me okay? Just making sure. Great. So, so we at Holly Troxel, we're bond counsel to the district, and we provide several services throughout the life of, from a district considering proposing a bond to actually proposing a bond and putting it on the election ballot all the way through bond issuance and then post-issuance compliance. So we help at the early stages of preparing a resolution that calls for an election. So the resolution that's for consideration for the board later is essentially doing three things, which is one, calling for a bond election, two, approving the form of the ballot and the form of the notice, so the actual language that voters are going to see when they go to vote. And then lastly, providing that if you get a 2/3 vote, that the bond election is effective and that the district will do the necessary steps, levy a tax in order to pay for the bonds. So we help at that stage and provide some advice surrounding your informational campaign, so what information you're providing the voters, and then advice surrounding that. And then when assuming the election passes, then we do our actual work as bond counsel, which is preparing all the documents for the bond issuance, and getting all the necessary approvals throughout that bond issuance process. And then and a large part of what we do as bond counsel is regarding tax exempt regulations, because a large part is wanting tax exempt debt, which has a favorable interest rate, and there's a lot of IRS regulations that surround that. So you need bond counsel in order to be able to issue tax exempt debt. At the closing, we issue what's called a bond opinion, which is a requirement for the issuance of any kind of tax exempt debt. So we basically oversee the entire process to make sure that we can give that opinion at the end. That's what people on the market want to see when you're selling the bonds. So that's kind of the process that we do. And then later on, we help with ongoing compliance, because assuming the bonds are sold on the open market, not just directly to a bank, there's continuing disclosure requirements and information that the district needs to provide over the life of the bonds thereafter. So that's generally what we do as bond counsel. Polytroxel specifically, we're one of the oldest firms that's in the Red Book, which is just a book you got to be in to be bond counsel. It's nothing special, and we represent the majority of school districts when it comes to bond issuances and provide advice there, and have helped out thus far and on the preparation of the resolution. But I wanted to run through quickly just a brief timeline of how this could look, assuming the board chooses to adopt the resolution this afternoon. So today, September 12th, would be the date of adoption. The ballot language is due to the counties on the 18th. So this is kind of one of the last steps before that needs to be done. That'll get placed on the ballot. The election will be held on November 7th. And then there's a challenge period post-election where if somebody felt that there was something, improper or illegal about the election, they can challenge the outcome. So there's a 40-day time period to do that after the election's been canvassed, at which point, once that runs, the election can no longer be challenged. So if the election passed, we wouldn't be issuing bonds just like that. We wait out that 40-day period to make sure that the bonds are going to be actually valid.
By Christmas.
By Christmas, yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully that'll run on Christmas, which would be a great gift. Next, I think, roughly around, and this is a rough timeline, so kind of, the district doesn't have to follow this timeline if it didn't want to issue bonds quickly after a successful election, but around January or February, the board could take action. There would just be a single action item that the board would have to do throughout the entire process, which would be adopting a bond resolution, which is a pretty hefty document that basically authorizes all the aspects of the bond issuance. And then generally, we also have you delegate authority to the superintendent, the business manager, to be able to take the necessary steps after that's been adopted to actually close and finish issuing the bonds. And then, assuming sometime in January or February that the board takes that action, then funds could be received as early as March. So that's just the general timeline. Any questions now before I get into election advocacy in general? Great. So there are some things to keep in mind for the board and for the district as a whole, district employees. There's a general prohibition on in what's called the Integrity in Elections Act, and this is applicable to all public entities, not just school districts. It prohibits public entities and their employees and public officials from using public funds and resources for advocating for or against any ballot or measure. So for the school district, it would apply to any ballot or measure, but generally we're talking in the context of the bond election that the school district's proposing. So advocacy is prohibited when using school district funds or resources. So that not only means actual funds, which is kind of the easiest to comprehend, but actually like school district time, employee time, school district property. There's a general prohibition over all of that, but there are some exceptions that are specifically laid out in that same statute. So in line with free speech rights, public officials and employees can use their own time, it's not school district time, and their own money to donate to ballot measures and election campaigns and to advocate on their own free time. So there's no prohibition there. Public officials and the district itself is not prohibited from encouraging people to vote, not voting yes, but just voting in general. And also, the school district is not prohibited from actually preparing and distributing informational materials. So the school district is more than allowed to educate on the bond, the proposed bond itself, the reasons for doing so, the tax impact, the projects, the amount of the bond, things like that, to make sure that voters are informed when they go to the ballot. So we don't want to discourage you from talking about it, but just make sure to do so in an educating manner. So,
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
about using school resources. Can we use the school resources like the teacher and parent emails to send information?
Yeah, you could send
Just
information.
information
Yep,
about
yep.
the bond.
Yeah,
The facts and.
Yep, exactly, yep.
Okay.
And we're more than happy to, if the school district prepares any materials and anything seems like it feels iffy, you can always run it by us, and we're more than happy to review those. But when it comes to just providing informational materials, I don't want to say anything goes, but there's very little restriction, if any, around that. So as long as it's informational, then that's totally fine. So some general guidelines that we talk about are prohibiting district resources and times, obviously, for any advocacy materials. So even if an employee was going to be doing something on their own time, if they're using like a school district computer or printer to prepare those materials, that's something that shouldn't be done. If there is going to be some sort of advocacy campaign, because obviously the community members are invested in this, there's no prohibition for community members or parents from forming their own type of, separate advocacy committee to go out and advocate, and the school district can communicate with that committee to provide information. So just because there's an advocacy committee out there that is out there going for a yes vote, they can be getting the information from the school district, because you want to make sure that people are informed. So if there's a separate committee, obviously the prohibition still applies on not using school district resources or time. But if the school district wants to communicate with that entity, that's completely fine. And I've already talked about the educating versus advocating manner, and any type of materials are going to be very fact specific on whether or not they're advocacy versus informational. Sometimes it's a really factual thing to look at, and something just to consider, that even if there's informational materials that you think you're totally fine, if sometimes you can push up just a practical consideration versus a legal consideration, is that often you think, oh, as long as it's not saying yes, then it's not advocacy. That's not always the case. If the school district's purposefully omitting, relatively harmful information about that, like if they didn't want to talk about what the tax impact could be, or if they're overstating, the effects of if the bond election failed, saying the sky is falling, that kind of thing is advocacy, even if they're otherwise providing informational materials. And generally, you want to try to keep it so that the school district itself is strictly just providing information that even doesn't give off the perception of being advocative, even if if somebody wanted to challenge it in court, and the court would probably agree that it's informational. I think generally you want to try to avoid even having to defend those types of allegations in the first place. So that's just something to keep in mind as the school district prepares its informational materials. And the next part of this presentation gets a bit into some new disclosure requirements, and so this is something to be aware of. And just as some background before I get into this, on the resolution, you'll see that there's just a wall of text that is really not fun to read about the financial impacts of the bonds. You know, the principal, interest amount, the tax of the cost payers, and that's all a relatively recent development in law that is now required on ballots for levies and bonds. And so, and it's gradually gotten more onerous as time has gone on, but this, I think, began roughly around like 2018. So that's now a legal requirement, which is why the ballot just looks so long, but that's a disclosure that the legislature wants to make sure is made. And this past year, House Bill 286 was passed, which now requires on any informational materials, so any mass communications and essentially any form or any media presented by a school district, so whether that's a website or flyers or postcards, that has to now contain that same financial impact information. So, you know, the total cost of the bond, when you take in principal, interest, bond levy equalization, and then the tax impact. So basically that section on the ballot now needs to be on every single piece of information that you have. Now, when this type of legislation was first enacted to put that on the ballot, the consequences are pretty dire. If somebody challenged the election and the school district has been found to have failed to comply, so they forgot to put that on the ballot, then the bond election can be held completely void. And this new requirement was placed in the exact same section in Idaho code, so the same consequences apply. So if the school district fails to put that on their informational materials that they're sending out to people or have on their website, then somebody could challenge the election and could be held invalid. So it's pretty steep consequences for something that could be a simple omission, especially considering that this is going to be on the ballot, but that's just how the law is written. So the stakes are a lot higher, so it's something to keep in mind. It's scary, but you know, this
That's
is
why we have you, though.
yes, no, and that's why we highly encourage that, you know, any informational materials, to send them our way for a quick look to make sure, oh, you didn't forget that, and then two, that you're not advocating, because those are two different consequences. Advocating wouldn't be an invalidation thing, but that's a misdemeanor, so you don't want to get fined and cited. So those are kind of the different consequences.
Can I ask you one thing about
Sure.
that? If the school district is providing answers to questions to the parent organization, like for example, Highland doesn't have this, and this will help them with that, will help them with that, like the science rooms, they don't have ventilation. And they, you know, things like that. If they are providing just answers to questions, like, this is why we need this, because we don't have this and this would solve this problem, do you then have to have all that bond disclosure on every then correspondence back to the parent?
No, well, so generally, no. I'm going to say
You
generally
know, like,
always,
the-
but
even the leader of the parent, you know?
no, because I think that there's a difference. You know, this applies to mass communications, and a mass communication is something that the district prepares that's going to be sent to 20 or more voters, or media that's presented to the public. So something like a website or something that's intended to be viewed by the public as a whole. So if you get an individual question from an individual, even though you think, you know, they might end up telling other people this, that's not a requirement. So no,
even
you
if
wouldn't have to just
know
copy and
that
paste that.
So even if you know it's going to this entire parent organization, so you'd probably wanna we'd probably wanna just put something at the bottom of each of those correspondence saying, do not use this, recreate your own.
What do you mean by do not use this?
Like,
Sorry.
do not use this correspondence,
Oh, right,
because it doesn't have the disclosures on it.
right.
Recreate your own.
Yeah, I
But
think,
they don't have to have the disclosures on.
No, they
every
don't.
Piece of information they disseminate,
right,
we just do.
right.
So if we just maybe put a disclosure,
Or don't put
don't
it in
use
writing.
this. Well, no, it has to be in writing, but
Right.
No,
it
I
has to
mean,
be-
your answer to someone.
all the answers, I think, should be in writing, so that they're all factually correct and in-depth and everything, but is that what we need to do? Is put a disclosure at the bottom of each of those correspondence that just kind of automatically populates and just says, don't use this specific document, recreate your own.
You know, I think that might be a little bit of overkill if you're responding to just like an individual member of like a, you know, parent organization. I don't know.
Well, I
that you
mean
need
the
to go-
president of the parent organization, like, you know that you're giving this information to more than 20 voters.
Right. Well, if you're just responding to like a very specific question, I still don't think that rises to the level that you need to do that. But
Okay.
any information that you're providing them, say you have like a PDF of like a flyer that the district's put together that's informational, that'll have it on there anyways. And so that can be provided to them, and would satisfy the requirement, you know, knowing that that's going to be going out. But I think if you're just responding to an individual's question, even if, you know, that they're a member of an organization, I don't think that falls in the statute where that's a mass communication that you're sending to a bunch of people or intending to be presented to the public.
Okay, thank you.
And I think we've gotten similar questions to that, you know, if a news media organization reaches out. I think, you know, the smart thing to do is provide, you know, say like, here's like all the information that we have, you know, it's on the website, or here's like a flyer containing all the information that you're looking for. I think that works. But again, you know, similar factual circumstances, say, you know, the media wants to ask questions about it. You know, you can't force them to provide that disclosure when you're just giving it to a single person, even if you include the disclosure in it. So I would encourage you to have it on any actual physical materials you do, but if you're just responding to a simple question, I don't think it's quite necessary.
This is actually a question then for Courtney. Are we going to have some standard FAQs that would then?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So I'll leave that, well, so that's the scary part, but I'll just leave it open quickly for any other questions around the advocacy portion, in case you as trustees want to know a little bit more about your role. I think generally you're not quite as restricted as school district employees would be. I think that often trustees are looked to be the ones to go out and get information out. Trustees can attend community meetings and you're not on school district time. And if you're there saying, you know, I'm a trustee, but I'm here just in my individual capacity, you can go ahead. You're more than welcome to encourage to advocate for the election.
Yeah,
So
And
at that
so.
point, you can.
Makes
advocate,
sense.
As long as you say, I'm not advocating.
Right. I mean, generally you don't want to be like, I'm here on behalf of the board of trustees to say, but, you know,
you're just answering as an individual.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah, I think we all kind of do that anyways.
right. Yeah. So
Everything.
not outside of normal practice anyways.
Yeah.
But generally it's something to keep in mind that you don't have to be afraid that you're going to get in trouble for something like that.
Okay.
Great.
Anybody?
You know, since Eric's here, I think we want to just talk briefly about the resolution, if we could. You know, Eric, as the district's municipal advisor, has prepared a bunch of the financial information, which I believe you also have a copy of. So if we want to, so I've already kind of talked a little bit about what the resolution is doing, but you know, I'd like to turn it over to Eric if you would like
Yep.
to speak a little bit on that.
So hopefully you all have this document that
Have a
was
couple of
distributed. Okay. And to clarify, I'm not the municipal advisor to the
Pardon me.
district. I'm with Piper Sandler. I'm a bond underwriter. I've worked with school districts all over the state for the last 20-plus years. I also work with Idaho State University. It's been a goal of mine to work with, you know, the 10 largest districts in the state, which I pretty much have, but except for Pocatello, Chubbuck, because you haven't had any bonds since about 20 years ago. And so all your bonds are paid off, and this is a lot of districts who are running bonds already have some bonds on the books, and they've been through the process. So I appreciate being here. It's the first time I've been in this room, and so I'm going to go through what I prepared here. Often I'll have a bigger document with, and since it's not on the screen, it's probably helpful to just have this one page. But we basically prepared 3 different scenarios for $45 million bond, 10-year payback, 15-year payback, and a 20-year payback. This is an interesting time to be, you know, a lot of districts don't run bonds in November. But as you know, the legislature took away the March election date. And also you're in a unique circumstance given the fire that you had. So there's more urgency to consider November. But with a November election and the deadline, there's a lot of new information that's coming out, like the updated market values, that will be, that we can utilize for. So the information I was preparing back in May for the district was based on old market value. There's new information on this program called bond levy equalization. And so we got those updated numbers. And then, of course, we've also got what I call House Bill 292, but is also more formally known as the District Facilities Fund, that's found in Idaho Code 33911, which was a new piece of legislation that provides money to districts, to school districts for facilities, but it's really to offset levies. And it's not necessarily direct money for facilities, unless you don't have any supplemental or bond levies. So all that's kind of new information. We pulled it in. So I'm going to read through the planning assumptions. You know, these disclosure languages that are in the ballot say based on current conditions. So we're basing this off of interest rates from last week when we prepared these numbers. So interest rates as of the 29th of August. Assuming that you get a AA3 bond rating, which is, I think, the type of bond rating, credit rating you'd get on a standalone basis. It also includes the state's credit enhancement. The state has a program that guarantees the bond payments on school districts' bonds. So the types of interest rates assume that level of credit rating. We've got your taxable market value updated, so when we calculate out what the tax impact is before the school facilities fund, it's based on the most current. And that's call it 7.6 billion. That's up about 300 million from last year. Your levy equalization, that's the program the state created back in 2004 timeframe, which provides a subsidy for bonds that have been passed since 2004. Your subsidy this year that you qualify for is 28% of your principal and interest is a subsidy from the state. And that's different than the school facilities fund. So all that's been updated. We're assuming a level repayment structure, so level amortization. And in this case, we're assuming the bonds would be sold and dated close, the date you'd get the money on March 15 of 2024. I thought I heard someone say you wanted the money by December, but maybe I was.
No, that was just
okay.
the bond, the.
The election results.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah, so if you needed it by December, we'd probably need to change a little bit with these
Yeah,
numbers,
no,
but it's not to say we couldn't do it, but it would be a challenge.
Yeah.
So let's just read down through the numbers. Let's start with the 10-year scenario. 45 million, the interest rate in the current market for a 10-year payback would be 3.36%. So the interest cost on the 45 million would be about 8.4 million. I'm rounding. So principal and interest 53.4. Then we subtract the projected levy equalization that you'll receive, because you'll receive that in annual subsidy payments. They come in at the end of August, roughly 15 million. So net 18.4. I'm sorry, net 38.4. In terms of what you'd need to collect in property tax before the school facilities money for a $45 million bond. So I think the important thing to think about there is that bond levy equalization is actually covering more than just the interest.
Yeah.
So you're paying back,
But then my understanding is that percentage is recalculated every year,
it is.
so it
Yeah.
could go
It's gone up.
It's been trending up for the last
trending up,
4 or
but it
5.
also could
It could
trend
go down. It could also go down.
Last time we talked about it was 28 point something, 27
20,
something.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's 28, so that's.
Yeah, and I ran through some kind of stress test scenarios. I think, our guidance has been to use based on current conditions. So that's
Yeah,
the current
okay.
condition, that's what we're using. So that 38.4 million, then we divide by 10, the number of years to pay back, and you have an average annual payment of 3.8 million. You divide that into your market value, and you come up with a tax rate. The actual rate would be 0.00051. For a long time, we just called that 51 cents per thousand. The newest disclosures require you to express it in the cost per 100,000 of market value. So now we say $51 per 100,000
Per year.
per year.
Yeah.
So, if you look at that net average annual payment though, it's 3.8 million. The amount of money you're getting from that school facilities fund this year was 4.5 million. So it's actually, you know, more than the payment that you need to come up with. So we're looking at this saying, well, based on current conditions, you wouldn't need to levy any property tax to repay the bond, because you either get the subsidy from the state through the bond levy equalization program or the school facilities fund money's coming in. And then I calculated out, well, what would be remaining to apply again, because the next step is to apply that money against your supplemental levy. And so you'd have about 720,000 left over.
Because it goes bonds and then levy.
It goes bonds first, then levies. And that's currently. There may be legislative change that would go bonds, plant facility, then
But we do not have a choice, it is coming out of our bond.
it has to go against bond.
So,
Yeah, I think the statute's pretty clear on that.
And is,
so we will not have to levy.
Yeah, correct. I'd say that in the 10-year scenario, the only risk, which was identified, is if your levy equalization money goes down.
right,
So I stress tested it and said, okay, since inception, the average subsidy, so this is going back to 2004, 2005 timeframe, is 22%. You're at 28% now. If I reran all this with 22%, that facilities money would still cover the balance.
but even that subsidy is not, it's only, have they said how many years? I mean, that's not even
We're
a,
based on current conditions.
right, I know, but I mean, we're, yeah,
I think so far we've seen projections about 3 years.
2 or 3
Yeah.
years.
What I've seen, yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen projections that go out 5 years. I've read the legislation more times than I care to admit. It's pretty hefty. But there's a sense that, oh, it's only really funded for 2 or 3 years. But I think what that is, you know, there's a bunch of different funding sources for this tax relief that the legislature created. But what they're trying to do is bridge a gap to get to a full-time support from sales tax distribution. So it's actually written in the code that there's gonna be, I think it's 2.25%, don't quote me please on that, but it's just off of memory, from the sales tax distribution. And right now, you know, the sales tax that gets collected by the state, a bunch of it goes to the counties, a bunch of it goes to the cities, it goes to some different purposes. Some of it goes to the transportation program, highway transportation program called TECM. And this is just another distribution in that waterfall that isn't, they don't want to commit to it until that third year. And there's,
Not only is it pretty solid for 3 years, it's based on solid footing that it would be going forward.
it's written into the code that it's part of the
That it would
waterfall of
just
distribution.
continue
Yeah.
Throughout the bond.
And then there's another, I think it's the same 2.25% coming from what was the tax relief fund, which is the online sales tax basically that got sort of warehoused for tax relief. And it's those funds that were used for the income tax relief for the last few years. So again, those don't kick in until a little bit later either. So in those first couple of years that we're seeing funding now, that's coming from basically the general fund surplus and the money's left over in that that income tax relief fund. So,
And then that warehouse is access later.
yeah.
Okay.
So those pieces go away, and so it allow time to bridge the gap until the sales tax components are providing more longer-term funding. I've seen projections out 5 years where the fifth-year projection is a higher subsidy. Subsidy is probably not the right word, but yeah, I mean, a higher payment than what you got this year. Possible that next year's lower. In fact, the projection is that next year will be lower by about 10 to 15%. So we'll just have to, you know, see, but I think, again, based on current conditions, very comfortable that we're, you know, accurately describing things. But even if we stress test those two subsidy pieces, I still feel strongly, you know, you can never say never, that you wouldn't have to levy property tax
For the life of the bond.
for the repayment term of the bond. Now, if you look at the 15-year and 20-year scenarios, the average payment's gonna be lower, because you're spreading out the bond longer. So I think you have even less risk on that longer-term basis because you're not, those funding mechanisms are gonna be,
If it goes up and down.
yeah, if it fluctuates, yeah.
Mhm.
And, it's, but you also have, okay, but there's more interest cost,
Right.
right, with the longer term, so.
But so many people look at, but if we have this continuously and it will cover it more completely that way, or at least you're more confident in it covering it completely, that makes sense.
Yes, when I,
You would extend it a little bit longer.
when I thought about, looking at the 10, 15, and 20, and what's, other than the interest cost, what would be the advantage of going longer? The advantage would be, I think, less risk that those funding streams got reduced and you had to go to the property tax to pay.
So
Then
that's
you'd have
kinda
fewer
interesting.
years, fewer
You have
years
less
then.
risk and it looks more positive in the payment, in the property tax payment to individuals.
You'd see more tax relief,
Mhm.
because more would come out at the bottom of the bucket to go against the supplemental.
So either way, they're getting.
In all three scenarios, there's, I don't want to say it's, I don't want to advocate for the, the bond issue, but they're all, I think, presenting a scenario where there's no property tax impact is a pretty exciting place to be.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and especially if
Yeah.
you are, well, legally, we do current terms,
Mhm.
current situation. And if you're very confident that it's, here's the thing, is it's all political. Who's gonna be the one to take that away? No one will. I don't think anybody will.
Yeah, I think it would be a real challenge to politically pull this one away after like so much was put towards it, and it's property tax relief, and there are, Oneida School District passed a bond, same scenario, they're not gonna have to levy property tax to repay it. They're
That's
getting,
so good. And that is not advocating for the bond, correct? To say there is no property tax impact.
yeah, I mean, it's a fact, yeah.
But-
Yeah, I mean.
Based on current conditions, that's a,
But that's the
that,
law,
yeah.
though,
Yeah.
is you have to base it on.
Mhm.
Right.
Is that right or not?
That's what we base the disclosure on.
Yeah, and we're jumping into that last,
I just want to make sure that we're clear here.
then we'll read that tax impact.
Yeah.
That has both.
So
Correct.
do you want me to read through the 15 and 20, or you can see the data is already
I see
there?
it.
Yeah, no, I can
And
see
it's-
it.
Yeah.
I see it.
I guess, but like you were saying, though, the only advantage, I mean, I guess I'm thinking do for the shorter term, just because you just get it done and,
But then it looks more ominous to the taxpayer right now. And if you're more certain about the longevity of being covered, this bond repayment being covered, those two factors, it's less money out of their pockets right now when people are feeling really
it's no money.
tight. Right, but I mean, yeah, that's my other question. But then also that, it's more secure, that it won't ever be money out of the pocket over the time. And we can always pay it back early.
Mhm.
Say we get the 6 million,
Mhm.
the 3.8 million, we can do double payment.
Yep.
And then we can use all of that, right?
Correct, yeah. Typically, the bonds, you
All of
can
that.
have the bonds, repaid in 10 years.
Oh,
They can be
yeah.
called in and paid off in 10 years if the revenues come in more
Yeah, but
significantly
just to
than
have that
anticipated.
flexibility, to have the lower payment and then do the big payments whenever we get that money back from
Mhm.
the state, does that make sense?
That makes sense to
to
me.
you?
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
It's trying to strike the balance of,
Mhm.
the interest cost, it's like, people think about a 15-year mortgage versus a 30-year mortgage, and,
Right.
you can save a lot of interest costs with a 15-year mortgage, but can you afford the annual payments? That's always the
Right, but then
dynamic.
it's the same concept there.
Yeah.
You can always make.
You can always pay it off early,
On
yeah.
your 30-year, and then essentially make it, although you have a higher interest rate,
Correct.
but yes. You can essentially make it a 15-year at a slightly higher interest rate. So on this disclosure, it's actually not all factually there, right? Because it doesn't have that money back. So it says that the tax impact is $33, 53, 39, and 33 per 100,000, but really the tax impact is zero.
Right.
Because we need to add another line in there that says, this is money that will be given to us for facilities costs from the state, and in lieu of that, the tax impact isn't that, it's zero.
Right, and on the resolution itself, there's, where that tax impact shows up, you're required to have up to that first line where it says the tax impact is gonna be X per $100,000 of taxable assessed value per year, and you gotta show the dollar amount there. So it's essentially showing it in a vacuum without taking into account these school district facilities funds. But then there's an additional sentence, because we can add a little bit of explanatory language onto the ballot disclosure, just for bonds, not on levies, but for bonds, that says, however, the district expects to receive each year, school district facilities funds in an amount that's going to exceed the bond payment.
Right, but it
Such
doesn't
that the
really
amount's
make
zero.
sense, it doesn't really seem fair that we have to put that tax impact and not just add that line like you're saying after, why can't we add that before?
We
And so
have,
that the tax impact is zero.
it gets to the point that it says tax impact is zero on the ballot, but
Okay.
legally speaking,
You have to do
you
that.
gotta get to the point of like, here's the X tax impact
I see.
in a vacuum based on these repayment terms that we've outlined above, and then, which
That
is,
the state will be paying.
right, and, yeah, and we run this to ground because I think we have originally wanted to have that same approach where we could just say straight up the tax impact is zero, but after talking about it, informally with like the Secretary of State and, because we wanted to get their take, and I think this is generally how we do it anyways. And now we're in the unique situation of having these school district facilities funds coming in that are gonna cause a lot of school districts to have that can cause a lot of school districts to have a $0 tax impact. And I think doing it the way that we normally do it, of getting to that tax impact in a vacuum and then just adding the additional explanatory language on there, makes everybody a lot more comfortable, because the stakes again
we
are
don't
so
want-
high.
Yeah, we don't wanna lose a lawsuit.
Right.
So if you go to the resolution itself, choose 1, 10, 15, 20, whatever you
Yeah.
fancy. And the end of page 2, that last paragraph that will also pick up at the top of page 3 summarizes exactly what Brendan and Eric were saying. And I love the word consequently in there,
So
because it
everybody's on-
specifically says it's zero tax impact per 100,000.
And which document?
So if you
is
want to
that?
just grab one of those toward the bottom, if you'll go back out to the agenda itself, Mrs. Judy?
So this whole
Okay, right
information.
here.
Yeah,
will be
just
on
grab,
the ballot.
that one will.
Yes,
And then if
that's
you
how
go
the
to the end
ballot
of
will,
page
that's how the ballot will
2.
read.
Can we bold and highlight?
I wish,
Big
That might be
font.
advocacy, I think.
that might be advocacy,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
won't
it's
comment,
truth.
but-
I think it's promoting telling the truth.
Right.
Yeah,
If
But
it
I
was
like
the
that it's right
opposite,
there
I would say the
above.
same thing.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't wanna just, if it was the opposite, I would say the same thing, bold it. If it's gonna cost them more, bold it.
Right.
But if it's gonna cost them nothing, also bold it.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance between what you're legally required to do versus trying to keep the voters informed, which is a bit more of a challenge. Like I said, again, on levies, you're not allowed to talk about anything else besides
Yeah.
a levy or an expiring levy, but at least on bonds, that is not a prohibition, so we can add this. Because otherwise the voters would see one thing on the ballot where they're saying, well, I thought the school district said that this was gonna be 31, this was gonna have zero tax impact, but why is it showing a tax impact on here?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's always that balance to strike, but I think what we have there is pretty good.
Okay,
That looks good.
all right,
That's the
Thank
best
you.
thing I
It
can
is.
say.
Of course.
we finished. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the Highland Century Bond Project. Draft floor plans. Jonathan and Courtney?
Okay, well, you kind of mull all of that great information. Just wanted to cover just a few things. Inside your packet is some updated drawings. Again, these are draft drawings. The lines, might change into different spaces. And you know, once the bond passes, we'll go into schematic design and you'll be involved, public will be involved and so forth, but it kind of gives us an overarching view with some highlights, again, from Highland High School, showing the auditorium, the cafeteria, the gymnasium, and the science rooms, the additional classrooms in the previous auditorium. Again, it shows some more detailed drawings, again, that are subject to change. Again, the overall footprint will not change, but the, you know, some of the closets might change, or, you know, and something like that, as we work through that, get input, and so forth.
I see an elevator in Highland. That was not there before, was it? That's new.
That's new.
Okay, yeah, and
I
that
know
would.
we talked about it at Century and
Correct.
decided not to, but was there a decision to do one in Highland?
No, there was not, and
We
so,
just put it there in case the people said you have to have an elevator.
correct,
Oh, right,
correct.
yeah.
So we,
decided that we had.
again, all these codes, you know, if it's for ADA and so forth, that'll all be vetted out and come
No,
come
you
through that.
changed something, the auditorium, the size and capacity of the auditorium did not change from the last drawing to this
Correct.
drawing.
That is correct.
So, but the band choir storage drum.
Yep,
All
yep.
that changed.
We did, yep, we just, I think that was kind of the feedback again.
So is that whole
And
thing
yeah, they
adding
changed
on
the
to the back of the
entrance
school
to the
then?
gym.
It looks like, instead of like a little thing on the other side, it's on the back going across.
Correct, it should just level on that east side, it should all be the, you know, flat there, where we had some, to the north, some kind of, what do you say, some, little things, the shop and the storage area sticking out there, we just kind of level that up, again, these are only just draft drawings to try to.
But every turn in your foundation costs more money, so.
Sure, all these drawings were ran by our construction manager, general contractor, and so all these were within those price estimates.
See the gym
The
entrance?
gym lobby.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, all those can change, yeah, yep, and now that will, you know, potentially can change, but we just wanted to show that, you know, here's some of the possibilities, the overall square footage, some of the features and so forth, but we'll, again, the architect and design team will, you know, talk to end users, talk to coaches, talk to Highland staff, talk to administration, parents, and so forth, to, you know, to see kind of the needs and make sure it's all met there within the dollar amount
Right, and
of the bond.
one thing that I noticed may be missing, unless I'm not seeing it, is the ticket booth. Is that going to be outside like Century?
No, again, that would be one of those spaces that we definitely, obviously need a ticket booth, and we'll make sure it gets put in there.
somewhere.
Correct. And these, again, will, as Ms. Fisher, you know, presents these to the public, we'll have draft, you know, until the conceptual, you know, designs are completed. And that'll be communicated great in depth come the spring. And then same thing with Century. I particularly like the first layout of the existing gym.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, that was a very handy, yeah,
Yeah, they did.
yeah, a very handy drawing there to kind of give a layout of what's the proposed increase there to the existing gym and the annex there. And so, anyway, just some additional drawings, I just wanted to highlight those. These probably will still be changed just a little bit for our public information that Mrs. Fisher is developing and again, running by bond council. I might comment, we've already had conversations with Brandon as we're preparing for this as well, so.
One little question, on the upper level at Century.
Yes.
The one side is for the second level of bleachers,
Mhm.
but then the other side over the existing gym, is that also for bleachers?
So no, that would not be, because again, that just looks down into the small auxiliary gym. He just kind of put some windows in there so that you could, you know,
So
look
that's just
down.
like, what is that, classroom space, or what is that?
Well, it would be the space would be the upper gym, so that would be, again, for your PE, the cheerleading.
When they talked about moving it
Okay, and again, that's another one that, you know, and through the schematic design, we can, we can modify that if needed. Again, as long as it'll be a give and take. Once the bond passes and we have X number of dollars, that's what we need to stay within to deliver what we're showing to the public, but yet, and still, make it as functional as possible.
Okay.
Ms. Fisher had some,
Do you have other questions?
oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, I don't have any questions.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So now is the exciting part. We get to start. I'm as eager as the community is to start releasing some of this information. So as you work to adopt that resolution, that gives us the details that we need to provide in all of our communications moving forward about the bond. So working through, there's a lot of exciting information to share, but it's also going to be very carefully delivered in consultation with our district administrative team, the board, as well as our bond council, as you heard this evening. So in your packet tonight, I've prepared a communication plan and timeline for the bond election public information. We started as early as August 7th. Once we really knew definitively that we'd be going out for bond, I started scheduling community presentations as well as our staff presentations. It says on this communication timeline that the media release about the bond resolution will go out the 19th. I believe we'll be able to do that even earlier. So this is a very fluid document. It will change as we solid up details and get ready to release those. The week of September, we actually have our first presentation to the Chamber Board on Friday. So we know that that may likely be just conversation, sharing these details, sharing the resolution before we have any printed materials, because I don't believe we'll have time to get those designed and in front of our bond, our legal advice, to vet those before that Friday meeting. But we will work as quickly. I mean, I have all the foundation laid. I'm ready to roll as soon as those details are finalized. We will do a fact sheet like we've done in the past. Our strategy doesn't change with the new law, but our approach does. The things that we're required to put on this document, we've always taken that education versus advocacy very seriously. With Dr. Howe's leadership and our board leadership, and we will continue to do that. There are just new regulations about what we have to include, and so we will make sure that we include all of those so that we don't make any missteps. We'll do some editorials. So basically, if you look down at the internal, external communications, our communication channels don't really change. I'm always looking at those low cost to no cost options that we already have at our disposal with Infinite Campus messaging. Our district website will really be the most robust aspect because that can house the most information, where we can have links to other information like FAQs. That will be a fluid document as we get communications or questions in. We'll continue to add to that so that we're making sure that we satisfy the public's need for information and understanding about what we're asking of them. We'll use media, earned media, mostly our school newsletters, our reader boards. We'll do a bond newsletter. We'll resume our podcast recordings. We're working with IDSPRA to develop an About the Bond video, and I will customize that. The plan is to customize that. It's just not quite there yet for me to begin that process, but that's the plan. So that we can use that information that's partially paid for by IDSPRA, but then we customize that specifically to our bond request.
Will you remind the board, ISPRA?
IDSPRA is Idaho School Public Relations Association. So we've been working in conjunction with my counterparts across the state to come up with communication plans. We all deal with the same issues, and so we're really trying to join forces so that we're pooling resources. We all share the same challenges with educating the public about the difference between a levy and a bond. And so that's what some of these communication tools are trying to do with those efforts. And then taking those resources and customizing them for our own specific audience and our ask. And then we'll be talking to community partners like the Chamber, and sometimes they've come out and endorsed our efforts. I'm not sure what the Chamber will do on this one since we haven't had a bond, so it'll be interesting to see come Friday. We've talked about doing site visits and site tours and more community presentations. Those community presentations are really at the heart of the sharing the information, going out to our staff personally and splitting up those presentations. I've shared that schedule with you all, so please look at that and sign up for any presentations that you would be able to come to, whether it's a community presentation or at our schools. So those will begin.
Is that in here?
That, I emailed you a link.
Emailed it
Oh,
Yes.
that's the
yesterday?
I believe, yeah, it was either yesterday or last week. And then on the second part of your packet materials is the budget proposal. So I wanted to walk you through that, and this is just for information tonight, and then it will be up for action next week. But just looking at some of those additional resources that we can use to make sure that we have an obligation as a district to educate the public. And one thing that I've heard in previous levy campaigns is we're not reaching the public that doesn't have school-age children as well as we maybe could be. And that's because we're just relying on those low to no-cost options that are already at our disposal. We use the newspaper, but that readership has gone down and visibility has gone down, as has radio. So there's just some challenges with getting this in front of as many registered voters as possible and really taking the due diligence to educate them about what this ask is on that ballot. And so you'll see on this that the proposal is to include some radio, to include some TV, that informational video that I just explained to you. And then the biggest expense is a postcard and mailer. And that postcard and mailer would be about 11 by, I think it's 8.5 by 11. So it's fairly large in size, and it would go to every registered voter household in the community. So I think for our due diligence, it's worth that
Yeah, it
expense.
looks pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was impressed
And
with
then
that.
we will print some additional mailers that can go to our schools and be delivered through our learners to their homes. So kind of a dual approach there. And then there's just some design costs that go in with that too. Again, our strategy and focus is always to educate and inform, not advocate. I fully believe that we have the facts at our disposal to if we share them wisely and put them forth in a straightforward approach, that's all it will take. Legal compliance is of the utmost importance. Some of these activities allow for fresh messaging, so just to make sure that it doesn't get static, that we can change up that messaging for early voting, for when that begins, when it ends, and really reminding people. I always take a get out the vote approach because I think it's a civic responsibility. School districts are a very important partner with that civic responsibility, so we we push voting whether we have something on the ballot or not. And I think that's important. And so we'll continue to be consistent with that, making sure people know when that election is. And I already talked about the low to no cost. And then our print materials will include a QR code because, again, we have the greatest opportunity to share the most robust information on our website. So we'll really make sure that we build out those pages with FAQs, with the schematic drawings are going to be really important. Those are going to be tricky to get on a one-page, postcard.
Well, we
So-
have those printed and posted where people can come see them if they wanted to actually
Yeah,
look at a
absolutely.
bigger.
Mhm. Yeah, we can do that.
On our website too, right?
They'll be on the website.
But if,
Mhm.
yeah.
Publishing-
We're actually we're going to print some on poster board we are hosting a breakfast for our legislators on September 25th.
Okay.
So we
You
were
all have that on your
planning,
calendars, right?
Don't.
we were planning to have those printed, posted on foam core, and then we bought some easels. We're going to display some of the plans for PV Tech as well as the proposed bond projects. And then we can move those over here to the district office as well. And then, like Mr. Ball said, as we work to finalize those sketches into a fully fledged design, we'll continue to post those and make those available to the public to bring them along in this process with us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So,
I think I'm
Take it home.
Take it home.
All
Okay, I
set.
just have one, quick comment. Thank you for, again, like to thank Brandon and Eric and their teams for generating these documents for us. I wanted to just make a quick comment regarding the tax impact. So and bring it, what's happening even this year in our taxes. So remember that this 4.5 million started this year. So we received this money, we've actually already received this money. So when we asked for our supplemental levy, we subtracted this 4.5 million from the 8.25 million. So roughly, we only levied 3.6 million from our taxpayer. Using the numbers that Eric provided, which I'm thankful for, that's about $60 per 100,000 of lower taxes this year. Okay, so, and that's obviously because we don't have the bond this year. So then next year, this bond will pass, our taxes will go up, that tax impact. So that's why I think we have to have, does that make sense? It's just the timing of how this comes out. Our tax, we are getting a great tax saving because of this school district facilities fund this year. We passed this bond in November. So the next year, they will go up a little in a little increment. It'll still probably cover that, but does that, am I making sense there?
We got the payment already.
Correct.
Yeah, but not because of the bond. It won't go
No.
because of the bond. It just goes up because of depreciation in homes. Is that what you?
No, because we already
No.
got the.
We already got the payment.
Oh, yeah.
We already got the payment this year without the bond. Does that?
And it covered our levy.
And it covered our levy, the 4.5 of it straight to our levy. And so that's why I think it's, again, I think it's perfect in our resolution, as Dr. Howell mentioned, again, we still show the tax impact, but then there is a saving that the tax impact for the bond will be zero, but overall, we still need to be transparent to our public, say, okay, your taxes, if the bond does pass, will increase $51.37 or $31 per 100,000. I just,
I guess I'm not really.
okay,
For a year, right?
per year, yeah.
If it covers the payment, how would that?
So you're saying that 4.5 of the fund subsidy will not be there?
No, I'm saying it will be. So this year, sorry to.
You almost need a whiteboard.
Yeah, a little whiteboard, so, yeah,
I
sure,
know,
sure,
say it again.
sure, thank you.
The 4.5 came off our levy this year.
The
So
100%.
what's the fiscal year?
So the fiscal year, this 4.5 that we got back came off our levy request for this year.
What's the?
So your taxes in December are going down 60.
Is it January to January?
That's the tax year.
Yes.
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 The year that you're talking about?
Yes.
So that would have come off before this levy is issued then? Because the issuance of this levy doesn't come till January, right?
Levy or
This year's
bond?
levy? No, the
The
bond.
bond.
Okay, so we're talking about two
Bond
different things.
issuance.
So
Correct.
we get money from the state. It covers bonds first, then levies, then
Yes.
whatever else. Okay, we didn't have a bond, so it covered our levy cost.
Right.
Next year, we will have a bond. It will cover the bond cost, but it won't cover the levy cost.
Right.
As much.
So-
when we ask for the levy, then we disclose this is how much the tax impact is on the levy, but the bond will be zero impact, correct? Because they-
Yes,
Yes, but I don't know
ye-
their-
yes, it will be.
Bond,
Okay,
please.
okay, I think I know.
Yeah, you got it?
Yes, it will be, it cover all the bond, but it won't cover as much of our supplemental levy.
Right, but
So
are
that
we
way-
disclosing levy and bond at the same time?
No,
Is my
no,
question.
no, this is 100% levy, but I'm just talking to our great taxpayer that has their tax bill in hand. This
So
year
they
it's
still see something on it and they say, hey, they told us it was zero.
zero, correct, which it could
the
do
bond,
zero,
it will be
but the
zero.
levy will increase because it had to go to cover the bond.
Right,
Right.
On the tax statement, it doesn't show levy versus bond, though.
yeah.
Does it?
It actually would. Let's say,
I was gonna say,
we don't
I
have
don't
this
know.
bottom, where this bond would add a tax statement. It would say, I'm pretty sure it says supplemental levy, plant facility levy, and then this would say bond.
Zero.
So it should say zero, so is this?
Well, if it says zero, it won't show, but I'm just saying, let's say we don't get this 4.5 million. I'm
Because
sorry.
we don't have one, it's not on
Right,
there.
because of that.
And like the.
Oh, today it doesn't, right, but if.
Correct.
Right, but if it passes,
Right,
would
but-
it say
but will
bond
it
is
say
zero?
No, it will actually not be there.
Oh,
No, I mean, when we do get the bond.
Yeah, correct. If it, again,
If it is
this,
zero, they just don't print it?
that is correct. Yeah,
Well, that's not really
they
giving us
don't waste the line. And that's to Eric's point, that when we wouldn't levy it, because we have the money to make, we have the 3.8 million, or the 2.8 million, or the 2.3 million to make that bond payment because of, yeah.
Gotcha.
It won't lean there. But again, it won't cover as much in the supplemental levy, so therefore, in the December of '24, the taxes will increase by the
But less
51,
than
30.
2 years ago.
Correct. Historically, it will still
So,
be
I
less,
mean,
absolutely.
I don't really know that we need to say it's gonna increase, because historically it didn't.
No.
Historically, it was always the 9.
Mhm. I'm just saying, definitely consider the overall tax impact as well.
Yeah.
Right, we
So,
can't
I
say
mean-
that the school will have 0 taxes.
No.
No,
Correct,
no, I
correct,
understand
correct.
that.
Okay.
And
so
I'm
I-
sorry to
I-
complicate
Would
that,
you
Dr. Howell,
say,
but I
would this be the correct way to say it? This bond will be 0 tax impact,
Mhm.
but you will still have the levy impact on your taxes.
That is correct.
Okay.
That'll
And
be,
that's all we need to say. We don't have to say increase and stuff.
sure.
Is that okay? Because
Eric,
it's
am I-
really not an
am I
increase.
just,
It's really not.
sorry
an
to
increase from what
complicate.
like
I'm
the
not
last-
bringing it home very
what-
fast here, sorry about
For
that.
the last 58 years, right?
Again, if you show the next 3 years, you're gonna be high, a little lower, slightly increased, but you're still gonna be lower than what you are this year because of that school district facility fund.
Yeah, fiscal '23, which is last year.
Eric, can I have you pull that mic?
Fiscal '23, which is last year. Because of the timing of all this, you'll have basically a temporary reduction because of this $4.6 million has to be applied against something,
Yeah.
and the bond's not there yet.
Correct.
Oh, and so even January, when our bond is issued, it will
Yeah,
still go
because the
through?
levy's already been certified and the money's already,
So is it March
the
when
county
it-
says, the county says, you got that money, so you gotta reduce the supplemental, because that's
all we have right
Yeah,
now,
I
yeah.
see.
So it's a temporary reduction. And then, as Jonathan pointed out, it'll go back up, but not as much as fiscal '23, because there's still some money left over at the bottom of the waterfall after offsetting the bond. That'll go against the supplemental. It just won't be as much going against the supplemental. And so Jonathan is just trying to point out that compared to fiscal '23, no increase. Compared to '24, because there's this temporary reduction, it's the supplemental piece that will go up a little bit, because now this money's going against the bond.
So in some ways, that also adds into the argument of going with a longer bond, because
Sure.
you have more
Right,
left
'cause you have
over
Yeah.
to
less
cover the supplemental.
in
Exactly.
less of it, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's,
Guaranteed that will cover
yeah,
it.
thank you, Eric.
More of a
So, no, you more
Yeah,
of a
okay.
So,
Okay,
and-
that makes sense. I
Okay.
wanna make sure that
And so
we're
to
being-
bring it home, again, I would still consider, interest cost and tax impact,
Right.
and then to choose which resolution, and that's what we're gonna be asking, I think, in this next agenda
Right.
item.
So I just want to be sure everything
Yeah.
is completely correct, and so that's the way we say it then. The bond will have 0 impact, the levy will have full impact. You will.
Still
you
have
will have that.
some of that, correct?
Okay, okay,
Yeah, starting next year, not this
Okay.
year.
okay.
Okay.
Okay,
Good.
that's, was there any discussion? Sorry, I just, clear as mud, sorry
Yeah.
about that. Thanks,
We'll,
Eric.
we'll we'll leave
I
it
want
at
to know for
that.
my own taxes too.
Well,
Correct.
And if I could,
They did
if
go
you,
down.
if you don't, I mean, I don't want to but I think if you had someone say, hey, that really knows this stuff, and said, hey, you're saying this bond won't impact my taxes. And you're saying, well, we won't need to levy for the bond. If the bond passes, well, the correct answer is your supplemental will go up because there won't be as much subsidy being applied to it as before. I mean, that's real, if you,
So
Correct.
it does
again,
go up.
I think that's what Jonathan is trying to
Correct.
say, is from a total transparency standpoint, if you get asked that question, you need to be prepared to say, oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. We had a temporary reduction in the supplemental because we didn't have the bond yet. We're just
But that reduction is only a 1-year thing.
1 year.
We go year by year.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank
thank you,
you.
thank
And
you.
so when is the bond money certified?
So again, we certify to the counties in the end of, no, actually the end of August. August, and then
So
it goes to
we
the
get
commissioners,
money?
go to the what?
Oh, so we I guess I thought that it was January, something happened in January.
That's part of that L2 that we talked about.
Correct.
Last time.
Yeah.
And so we've already pretty much said we will send forward $4.5 million
Correct.
to offset the supplemental levy for the November or
Yeah.
December tax notice.
So the voters approve things in November, they approve things in May, and then that's when we submit our L2, this form to the counties. They say, okay, this is what the voters have approved, this is what we need to get from the taxpayers to cover our operating costs through supplemental levies or through, for our bond payments.
So I guess I just am not super clear about when the bond is funded.
March.
Yeah, so the bond would be funded in March, and then we'll get that payment reschedule. And so it'll be the next year that, okay, we'll know, let's just say we use this 2.8 million, okay, that's our payment, so I need, and then we'll calculate how much we need from our taxes.
But that's when we can start paying contractors and things. We get the money in.
Yeah, correct, we could definitely go
Okay.
in March.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Wow.
We need these questions answered.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I complicated it.
Appreciate a little patience.
Okay.
I feel I did.
And
Okay.
Well, next on the agenda is public comment. I haven't received any requests. So I'm going to recess this meeting and convene a special meeting, taking action to adopt the bond election resolution. And I'd entertain a motion to adopt either the 10, 15, or 20-year bond election resolution. Is there a motion?
do you guys think we should do I'm not gonna vote for the 10, but I'm just wondering, what do you think about between the 15 and the 20?
I thought we were looking maybe at 17. No.
No, let's just stick with one of the, the multiple.
Come on, let's stick the numbers.
But I'm wondering, a little bit, I'm thinking the 20-year because of what he said about, that we want to be sure that it's covered.
But I
every
think
year.
the thing that makes me nervous is the 20, is you're what, 3 times
Yeah,
the
Yeah.
interest?
yeah.
I mean, and so you've now taken a
Yeah.
45 million to
maybe
a
the-
66 million.
Right, but I just want to be sure it's covered every year for the taxpayers, that they don't feel, they don't pay for it.
But even that's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
We won't know that. I mean, the only reason I hedge towards 10 is because if something changes and the legislate, whatever they do, we have a shorter period of time, but then we're locked into the payment. Whereas if you do the 15, if we have the funds or ways to pay it down early,
We can also.
we
pay
can
it
do
down
that.
early.
Yeah.
We
I-
just have that flexibility if
I think,
something does change.
15 years, though, sounds like
I think 15.
reasonable.
I thought,
think.
yeah, I think the 15 would probably be.
what was the Century
What?
bond?
It was 20.
It was a 20-year bond.
It was
I
20?
think
20
most-
years.
Are most bonds, I guess from what you've seen in the state, are most bonds 20 years or does it vary?
I'd say 20 is typically the starting point. We can see Bonneville does 17. They feel like that's their magic number. We've seen some as long as 25.
Uh-huh.
Are those bigger numbers though, Eric? Are those 80, 90, 100 plus?
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
So I guess, can you recommend one that you feel like? Or not?
Me?
Yeah. Cause I felt like the
Yeah.
recommendation was leaning toward longer than 10.
Yeah, I like the 15 just because I do feel like it does, gives you that flexibility,
Mhm.
gives you more money at the bottom of the waterfall. It's a nice balance between the two, the 10, which, and the interest cost savings that is available with a shorter bond. And you have the ability to pay it off early if everything
Yeah,
comes in.
exactly.
So with this, the 1.7, we could be applying to our supplemental levy.
Correct.
Correct.
Mhm.
And I would second that, as I was whispering, well, yeah, I would second the 15. 15 as well. Again, it marries both, interest savings and taxpayer impact. I think it's a good middle ground, and it gives us flexibilities for,
Yeah.
anything in the future as well, not
And then
too
Do you
long.
feel, if we make this a point of this board to make sure that we dedicate paying off early if we can, not,
So.
And the next board will do whatever they want.
So I can, and for me, again, that's my job is to save the district money as any time we can. Even to, for the Century bond, it was the, Century and Pocatello, bond there was, actually refinanced. Do you remember,
2012?
yeah, 2012, and so it was, to save approximately $700,000, and I would do that same thing.
Yeah, and it's safe money, yeah.
And to save money,
Sure.
we would do that, just like
Right.
refinancing your home or, something like
Right,
that.
and I remember you saying that also there were I guess, money saved in the way that you did your payments, paying things. I remember you also.
Sure,
saying that.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
with the bond,
anything
but
that we can
also-
do to save,
So
I mean,
we appreciate that.
sure. And so I promise, that's definitely a commitment, because that's my job to, and using Eric as well to kind of say, hey, let's look at refinancing, okay, how much we could save versus, what the cost of that refinance would be.
Okay.
Again, if it, a few, years down the road there.
Do we still have, is Jim on the phone?
It looks like he is.
Did he have any?
Jim, do you have any comment on this? Are you still there, Jim?
Nope, maybe not.
Maybe
Well,
not.
I'm ready to make a motion.
Good, I'll entertain that motion.
I'd move that the board adopt the 15-year bond election resolution.
I second it.
Any discussion? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Jim, last chance.
If you vote anything different, you lose anyway.
You lose.
Okay, the motion is passed.
Did we vote? Did we say all in favor?
Yeah, we did.
Yep, except for. no
Jim,
others.
okay.
This concludes the meeting, and I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great, thanks.